Now, this section is going to be a little bit annoying because in order to challenge Martin, there's a bunch of buttons that we have to find and click. And so I am going to go through the first couple of them so that you guys can see, but I'm not going to go through the HTML code and finding all of them, because I think after the first two, you kind of get the point. And there are a few of them. So now I'm going to open up chess.com again, and I'm going to log in. And so once you log in, you should be brought to this page. And when you see this, now what you want to do is you want to try to navigate to challenging Martin and actually challenge him. And when you do that, take a note of everything you click. So the first thing you got to do is you got to go to this play tab right here, and you got to click on computer. And when you click on that, then after that, this pop-up comes up, and you need to click this start button so that you can get rid of it. Once that's gone, you need to find this Martin logo so that you can actually challenge him. Then you need to click on this choose button, and then you need to click on whatever of these three you want to click on. In my case, I'm going to choose challenge, and I'm also going to pick random so that whatever color we are is not necessarily going to be white. It could be white or black. And then after you click on those two things, you need to click on this play button. And once you do all of those buttons, you are now finally challenging Martin. So the first thing we have to do is we have to navigate from this page to the page that we just saw where you can challenge all of the AI. And I think the easiest way to do that, instead of clicking the buttons, is to actually just take this URL right here and do the same thing that we did for the login page. Notice in our code, remember that we ran this function to open up chess.com at the login section. We can actually just call this function again, but instead of going to /login, we can go to /play/computer like we have up here in the URL. And what this will do is it will navigate to that page. And it's just a little bit easier than having to go through the buttons and clicking when you know what URL you want to go to already. So now that I have that done, I will run this script again, and you'll see that after logging in, the first thing that it'll do is just go to the computer page. And that's excellent. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. But now we need to make sure we click on this start button. And so I'm going to run this script again, but I am going to have it wait longer than 10 seconds. I'm going to have it wait 1,000 seconds so that when it does bring us to that page and that pop-up comes up, I can right click on it and just try to see what the HTML code for it is. And so now here the page has come up, and I'm going to right click on this start button and click on inspect. And this can be a little bit tricky. Notice that when I right clicked here, it didn't actually show the HTML that we wanted. And the reason I know that is because when you highlight over this HTML code, it kind of highlights the whole page when it should just highlight the button. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to try again. And it didn't work again, but maybe if yeah, you have to try it a couple times. I'm not sure exactly why this button's a little bit finicky, but eventually it does bring us to exactly the HTML code. And notice when I hover over it, it highlights just the button. And so this HTML code does not happen to have an ID like the username and password and login button, but you don't need the ID in order to be able to click on it. What you really need is you need a unique identifier for the HTML code. So you need to look at this and you need to see, well, it has a type of button. Unfortunately, this is not the only thing on this page that has a type equal to button, so you can't use that as the unique identifier. The thing that does seem unique to me is this data-cy variable, which is equal to modal first time button. And when I do try this, it actually is unique and it does successfully click that button. And so that is what you actually need to use instead of the ID. So now that we have it, the modal first time button, you can once you copy that information, you can close this. And what you can do is you can add this line. And this line is using the very same find element function that we used up here in the login, except instead of using ID equals to, we use that data CY is equal to, and we set it equal to the modal first time button. And just like with the login button, all we need to do is we need to get that play button, and we need to run this click function on it. And once you run those two things in succession, what should happen is this line should find the button for you, and then this line should click on it. So if I were to run this code again, it should just click on the button. So now that I've added that click function, I am going to add one more thing. And in that case, it's going to be this sleep function. And the reason I'm going to add this sleep one function here is because this function right here on line 43 it's going to take time to run. When you run www.chess.com play/computer, when you take that URL, you put it into Google Chrome and you load it, it's going to take time. And this script is not going to wait for that web page to load. As soon as line 43 is done running, even if it's still loading on the browser, line 45 is immediately going to try to find that button. And if the web page is not done loading, what will happen is line 45 will run and it won't be able to find the button. And so you're going to unfortunately run into this issue where the code might throw an error and it's not going to do what you want it to. It'll never click that button for you. So I do add this sleep one right here in order to ensure that everything is done loading by the time I want to click this button. And on that note, I am going to add another sleep function here. I am going to add this function as for the same reasons. When I'm done logging in, I want to make sure that the web browser has some time to log me in before I try to navigate away from that page. And so I am going to run this again, and you should see the script log me into chess.com and then route me to the computer page, and then click that start button. And this is perfect. This is exactly what we want. Now we need to click on the Martin button. We need to click on the choose button. We need to click on challenge, and we need to click on this random. Then we need to click on play. Now that's a bunch of steps, but I think you kind of get the point of how to do them. You look at the HTML code, you find something unique about it, and then you add those things to the function by using the find element function to get the element, and then using the click function on that element in order to actually click it. And so I'm just going to add that to the code here because I don't feel the need to go through those one by one. I think you get the point. And then I'm going to run the script again so that you can see it actually does challenge Martin. And so now I just added all those button clicks to this function. You'll see that I added some comments. So this navigates to the Chess AI page. This clicks that first time button. This then chooses Martin. So all I do is I find the element associated with that Martin icon, and then I click on it. This button, there's this choose button that you need to click. This is the element associated with it. And it's just something that pops up once you click on the Martin icon saying that you want to choose him. Then this is to choose random for the color. And this is to choose the mode, which I remember clicking challenge. And then you just need to click on the play button. And that's all these lines do. They use the X paths to find it. And they all use the find element function and the click function. So I am going to run this again. I also removed the return statement here as it's no longer necessary. I am going to remove it for the login function as well. It was only there so that I could run the script earlier, but they're not needed anymore. So now I'm going to try to run this again. And when I do this, it should click all of those buttons in the order I define them. And it should just open up a chess game with Martin. So as you can see, it's clicking the buttons. It chooses Martin, click choose, random. And as you can see, now I'm black and it has started a game. And that's great. That is step 3. That one's going to be the biggest pain, to be honest with you, just finding that HTML code and clicking on it. But once you do it, you're finally here. And you can use that to navigate any web page. But in this case, this is how you would use it to navigate chess.com to challenge Martin. So now that that's done, the next thing you need to do is finally use your speakers in order to dictate some information to you. And so that's where this get color function comes in. And so we are going to use the driver that we mentioned before in order to have the speakers work. So we are going to start off this function with this first line of code here. And basically what we're doing with this line is we are initializing a new variable. Whenever I preface a variable with this self keyword here, that means that any other function can use it. So in our init function, notice everything I initialize in my init function starts with a self. So for example, this self.driver was initialized in the init function, and I'm able to use self.driver in the login function, the open chess function, the challenge Martin function. That's why you initialize everything in the init function and preface everything with a self.driver. So when I go to the get color, I am going to preface it with this self here, because I'm going to need to use this variable when I get to the play chess function eventually. I'm going to need to know what color I am. And so I am going to define it as true, just to by default say I'm playing white. And then I'm going to attempt to look at the board using the Google driver, using the HTML. I'm going to try to find something in the HTML that might tell me what color I am. And once I do that, I'm going to try to use my speakers to just say that color out loud. And so I'm going to save this and I'm going to run the app once again. And I am going to try to find something that might indicate to me what color I am. So now here we are playing against a game against Martin. And you might want to try to find something that indicates to us what color we are. And so I am going to inspect. And you can see that when we hover over this HTML, we have a board. Now, because I've done this before, I know that when we're playing white, the class is just board. But when we're playing black, it's actually board flipped. And so I'm going to try to run it again. So hopefully you can see that when you are playing black, it says board flipped. And so this time we did get lucky and we paired off against black. And so I'm going to try to do the same thing. I'm going to inspect. And I'm going to try to find that board. So I'm going to try to drill down. And as you can see, this time the class is now board flipped instead of board. And so this is what I'm going to try to look for in order to figure out what color I am. I'm going to try to look for a class that is equal to board flipped using my Chrome driver. And if I do find something equal to board flipped, that means I'm playing black. If I'm unable to find something equal to board flip, then that means I'm playing white. And that's going to be how I write the rest of this function that tries to tell me what color I am. And so in order to start off, I am going to add this line of code here. And it's using the same find element function that we're used to, except this time I'm going to try to find something with a class equal to board flipped. Now we haven't seen this yet, but in the event that find element is unable to find something that you've asked it to find, the function will actually throw an error that will stop your program from functioning. And that's not what we want. What we want when it's unable to find something is to just tell us we're playing black instead of white. And so what we're going to do is we're going to catch that error just using a try catch. So we're going to type this try keyword here and we're going to indent board so that the first thing we do is we try to do this. And if an error is thrown, then that means we can update this self.playWhite instead of true. Now we know it's false. And it would be nice if we could print that information, but more importantly, we now need to speak that information. So don't forget, the whole point of this function is to audibly say to the user that we are playing a certain color. And so the first thing that we're going to do is if we make it inside of this try, if this is successful, if line 73 runs successfully and we make it to line 74, we're going to print that we are the color black because it was able to find that color. It was able to find that class of board flipped. Now what we need to do is we need the speakers to audibly say that we are black. And so in order to help me with that, I am going to first add a helper function because we are going to need to use our speakers quite a few times in this script. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the bottom of this file and add a helper function. And in this case, it's going to be this function called speak text. And it's just going to be 2 lines. But it's going to use this self.engine, which we initialize in init. And it's just going to take text and it's just going to run these 2 functions. And what it does is it uses our speakers to just say whatever string we pass it in. And so I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to use this function to have the speakers just audibly say that we are playing the color black. And I'm actually realizing now that this equaling false here should actually be in this try as well, because this is when we're not playing white. When we get to line 73, that means we found out we're black, so we want to set this equal to false. And in this exception, we don't actually want to change that value because we are playing white in that case. And all we want to do is we want to print out that we're playing white, and we want to audibly say that we're playing white. And that's it. Now, when we run this script, it should also tell us what color we're playing. So I'm going to try to run this again and just try to demonstrate that to you guys. And hopefully you should hear my speakers and you should hear the script saying the color that we are. And unfortunately, it threw this error here. It was unable to find the speak text function that I tried to use on line 75. I did define it here, but I did forget to indent it. And the reason that's important is because if it's like this, it's not considered as part of the class because only whatever is indented under the class will be considered a part of the class. And so I do need to indent it just so that it's picked up inside of the class. And so that's just Python showing how important it is that you need to have proper indentation when you try to run these things. So I'm going to try to run it again, and you should hear it this time.
You are white.
And there you go. Hopefully you did hear my computer say you are white. I'm going to try to run this again, and hopefully we get black, and then you'll be able to see that if we get black, it'll tell us that we're playing black.
You are black.
Awesome. Hopefully you heard that. It did say you are black, and so now we have step 4 done, where now we know what color we're playing, which is great. The only function left to work on is this play chess function. And once we finish with that, not only should we have a game in front of us, not only should we know what color we are, but now we can finally just play the game. And this function is going to be the most, it's going to have the most code in it for sure. I did try to condense it, make it as understandable as possible, but this function is going to be the meat and potatoes of this script. And so to start off with, the first thing that we need to do is get rid of this sleep. And remember, this function is just going to run 2 steps on repeat. And so what we need to do now is we need to use this while loop, because since we're running on repeat, we're going to just want to keep doing things over and over and over again. And so I'm just going to add this while loop right here. And now with that, we need to just have 2 sections for this code. One where it's our turn and one where it's our opponent's turn, and we need to do the corresponding things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this if statement, and I'm going to have it say if it's my turn. Now I haven't defined this is my turn function yet, but this is something that we can do later. For now, I just kind of want to get the logic out of the way for this function. So we're going to write this function later, but the first thing we're going to do is check if it's our turn. Now, if it is our turn, the first thing that this script has to do is it has to listen for our move. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this listen for move function. This function also has not yet been defined, but again, I want to get the logic out of the way. All this function should do is turn on the microphone and listen for audio input. And once it hears a move from me, it should store that move inside of this move variable. Now this function's not going to know whether that move is valid or not. We'll do that a little bit later on, but this function's sole responsibility is to turn on the microphone and listen to us for a move, and then whatever it hears from us, it puts it in this move string. And so once we have that audio input, what we're going to try to do is we're going to call this other function that we haven't defined yet, which is make move. And this function is going to try to actually make the move on chess.com. And the way it would do this is it would use the Chrome driver once again, and it'll try to find the piece we're trying to move. It'll try to click on it. It will try to drag it to the square we want to drag it to. And then once it's there, it should let go of the piece. And that's exactly what you would do in real life. So that's what this function would do. Now, the next part of this script, and we're going to want to sleep a little bit first. But after that sleep, the next thing we're going to do is call this player has moved function. And we haven't written this yet either. We haven't written this function yet either, but this is the last function that we're going to have to write. There's only 4 helper functions inside of this one. And all this does is it checks if the current player has moved. In this case, it's us because we're inside of this if statement that tells us it's our turn. So it's going to tell us if we have moved. And the reason we have this check is because we don't know if make move is going to be successful. Like when we run the listen for move function, it's going to get a move from us. But when we run the make move function, that's what's going to tell us if the move was valid or not. Because it's going to try to make the move. And let's say I try to move a king like a queen is supposed to move, and I'm trying to move it all the way down the board. The make move function will grab the king, try to move it all the way around the board, and obviously chess.com is not going to let that happen. So then once that's done, in order to see if our move was valid, we're just going to check to see if we made a move. And if that returns true, then we know the move worked and it was valid. If it returns false, then we know we've made an invalid move. Now, one thing I did forget to add is I am going to need a variable that keeps track of what move number we're on. And so I am going to go to the top of this file here, and I'm going to go back to the init function. And I am going to add another variable. And in this case, it's just going to be these 2 variables in particular. One of them is going to keep track of the number move we're on. And that's going to be important to figure out whose turn it is, because if we're playing white, for example, and we want to know if it's our turn, then we are not going to be able to know unless we know what move number we're on. And I'm also going to have this other variable to let us know when the game is over. I'm going to start it off as false, but basically, eventually, something's going to turn this to true, and when that happens, it'll tell us that the game is over. And that'll be useful so that we can exit that while loop and we can finally finish the script. And so going back down here, if the player has moved, the only thing we're going to want to do inside of this if statement is we're going to want to increment that move num variable that I just initialized by 1. And in the case that this is not true, all we're going to want to do in this case is we're going to want to inform the player that they've made an invalid move. So we're going to have another speak text function, and we're just going to put this invalid move string here. And all this is going to do is use our speakers to say invalid move out loud so that the player knows that what they just tried to do is not okay. And that's it. When it's our turn, that's really all we want to do. We want the microphone to listen for a move. We want this script to attempt to make the move. We want to check to see if that move was successful. If that move was successful, increase the move counter. And if it wasn't successful, just tell the player. Now that's if it's our turn. If it's not our turn, we're going to want to do something very similar. But this section is just going to be actually shorter because we don't need to bother making a move. The only thing we need to do in this section is we just need to constantly check to see if the other player has moved. In this case, it's our opponent's turn. So player has moved is going to check to see if our opponent has moved. And if they have moved, we increment the move counter. And we also want to sleep for 3 seconds. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, how are we going to know what the move was? And I'm going to include in player has moved. I am going to add a speak text in there so that the speakers will say what move the player made. And so when it's our turn and we tell it, it will also use the speakers to tell us what move we made, just so we're sure the computer heard us correctly. And on line 100, when it's our opponent's turn, they're going to use the speakers to tell us what the opponent moved so that we know, because we're blindfolded and that's information we're going to need. And so when the opponent hasn't moved, we have this sleep for 3 seconds here just so that we don't overload this script, because if we didn't have it here, then after this check, we're just going to go back to the top of this while loop and we're just going to keep checking if it's the opponent's turn, and then we're just going to keep checking if the player's moved. And it's just computationally expensive to do that. It's just a little bit better to put this sleep here so that instead of running it millions of times per second, it just runs it once every 3 seconds, which would be a lot better. And it just saves on computational energy. And that's all we want to do when it's our opponent's turn. We just want to check to see if they've moved, and this will tell us audibly what move they made if they have, and we want to increase the move counter when they finally do move. And that's it. And then at the end of this while loop, like before the while loop is over, we also want to check, like once we're done checking who moved and we make the move or whatever happens during that turn, we just want to check to see if the game is over. Once the game is over, we're going to break. And this game over variable, remember it's initialized to false, but we're going to set it to true in the event that this player has move function sees a # in the chess notation for the move that was made. So if we make a move and that generates a # in the chess notation, that means we've checkmated our opponent. If our opponent makes a move and there's a # in the chess notation, that means that they checkmated us. And in that situation, we're going to set this game over flag to false, we're going to set this flag to true, so that we can break out of this while loop because the game is now over. And that is, in its entirety, this play chess function. And that's basically how it's going to work. It's consistent with those 2 steps on the slide. The only thing we have left to do is to define these helper functions. And I am going to go through them one by one, starting with is my turn.